Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. So, like and subscribe if you are new to the channel and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now, on to today's topic. Today's topic is a pretty fun one, interesting, and will probably involve a lot of debate. So, this story is about Devil's Nest, Nebraska, which was a hideout for a lot of outlaws. But this story, we are going to talk about Frank and Jesse James and a story of their time in Devil's Nest. So, first of all, you need to understand a little bit about what this area called Devil's Nest is. So it is an area in northeast Nebraska. It is next to the Santee Sioux Native American Reservation in Knox County, Nebraska. It borders the Missouri River close to South Dakota. And it is named for the rough, rugged canyon and ravine country with thick brush and scrub oak and just real dense. And this shrubbery goes up and down the hills, and it's difficult terrain, and it's very hard to find your way around here, and rarely any white men had set foot in this area back in these days, and we're talking the mid 1800s. So, outlaws, though, did like to use this area to escape the long arm of the law because it was difficult to find your way around in there. And like I said, the white men typically didn't go into this area. So, because of this, a lot of outlaws used it. Like it was said that the horse thief Doc Middleton had used this area to hide out. It said Frank and Jesse James were here. It was even mentioned that Wild Bill Hickok may have been here also. So it got its name of Devil's Nest originally from the first surveyors that came to the area, and they were standing on a bluff nearby overlooking these canyons and valleys and this twisted mess of of shrubs and ravines and everything. And one of the gentlemen said to the other one something along the lines of, "I hope we don't have to go down into that Devil's Nest." And ever since then, it was always loosely called Devil's Nest, and that name had kind of stuck through the years. So it is said in this area there are buried treasures from outlaws that had, robbed banks or whatever and came here to hide out. And like I mentioned, there are quite a few different outlaws that are said to have been in this area. But the native Sioux people did have their reservation right next door to Devil's Nest, and I believe Devil's Nest even kind of bleeds into the Santee Sioux reservation there. And they like this area because obviously you can tell by just the description of the area, it's good hunting ground. So they would hunt in the area, and the Sioux got to know the area, fairly decent too. And I believe the Sioux reservation there, the Santee Sioux reservation, was this land was granted to them. I believe in 1866 they were brought onto the land, and most of what's called Devil's Nest today is just to the east of the reservation, but some of this treacherous landscape does kind of blend into the Sioux reservation there. But it was said when the first Native American, the Santee Sioux were brought here, it was said that they were uncivilized. I don't know exactly what was meant by that, but that's what some of the historical references and records of the day say. Now that you understand a little bit about Devil's Nest and what this area is like, we can get into the main topic of the story, which is Frank and Jesse James. So The James brothers used Devil's Nest multiple times to hide out for long periods of time, and it was said they hid out there in 1869, 1873, and 1876. Not sure exactly how much time they were there in each of those years. But anyhow, Highway 12, that's just south of this area, is still called the Outlaw Trail Scenic Byway in reference to all the outlaws that used to, hang out in this area. But the story we're going to talk about with Frank and Jesse James comes from a book. And this book is called Echoes of the Past Along Pioneer Trails. So this book was written by Esther Colcherman Hansen, and Esther's book was published many, many decades ago because she was born in 1894 around the area, and her husband was born in 1890. So she was around a lot of these people that knew a lot of these stories. And anyhow, these stories she wrote down when they were pretty fresh, to her and to people that she was talking to that directly had talked to people that had dealt with the Native Americans and Frank and Jesse James. So we're going to read a quick excerpt out of her book, and I'll just go through it verbatim so that you can see what she wrote and what she had to say about Frank and Jesse James. So the story starts like this. In 1938, Joe Jesse Chase, a half-breed Sioux Indian who lived near Niobrara, claimed he was the son of Jesse James. The Indians of Niobrara County had long said that Chase was Jesse James's son, but Joe would never talk about it. He claimed he was afraid to. In 1938, Chase stopped at a store of a Niobrara druggist and told him he had a story to tell, which he then told. Though Chase didn't have the coppery skin of an Indian and spoke little English, he told his story with his daughter-in-law as an interpreter. He claimed the story was told to him by his mother and other Indians. In 1869, Chase said, Frank and Jesse robbed a bank in South Dakota and were pressed by the law. Fleeing, they reached the Devil's Nest area on the Nebraska side of the river, and they're referring to the Missouri River. So Chase said James had money belts that were full of gold, and when Frank and Jesse came, they came driving a herd of cattle and told the Indians their last name was Chase. They said they liked this part of the country and they thought they would settle down here. A Frenchman named Anthony Janique, who did blacksmithing work for the Indians, suddenly had enough money to set up a trading post in Devil's Nest. The Indians surmised that the Chases had furnished the post or had furnished the money for the trading post. So one of the Chases practiced horse and pistol work, jumping their horses over logs and firing revolvers in midair. And one of the Chases made a snowball and threw it into midair and shot it with his revolver. And he told the spectators, "That's the way Jesse James would do it," and he chuckled. Of course, he was Jesse James. United States Marshals came to the Devil's Nest looking for the Jameses, but never found them. You could never find anything in Devil's Nest unless you knew your way around, and who did? The Jameses' mother, Mrs. Zerelda Samuels, came to Obert, Nebraska, a small village about 20 miles from the Devil's Nest. Her sons used to ride there frequently to see her. The James brothers decided to log cedar trees to make some honest money. They hired Indians, cut the logs, floated them down to Yankton, South Dakota. The logs technically belonged to the government, but nobody paid much attention to that. The brothers met two beautiful Indian sisters, the daughters of Thomas Wabusha. Jesse took a wife, Maggie Wabusha. Frank took the other sister, and I believe the other sister's name was Mary. Joe Jesse Chase James was born to Jesse Chase James and Maggie Wabusha in 1870. Several months later, the other Wabusha sister gave birth to a girl who was named Emma. On July 4th, 1870, about 4 months after Joe was born, the James brothers' peaceful life ended in Devil's Nest. On this 4th of July, almost everyone from Devil's Nest country had gone to Niobrara, then a wide-open town to celebrate. At the trading post, something had happened between the Chases and Janique. No one will ever know the truth. The Chases gave their Indian wives a lot of money and told them they were going away for a long time. Several hours later, Janique's family came home. The door was locked, and to gain entrance, they were compelled to knock down the door. On the bed lay Janique's body, a bullet through his head. A gun lay on the bed beside him, but the Indians refused to accept the supposition of suicide. Janique, they said, had held out more than his fair share of the gang's money. He met the fate of those who crossed the Bandit brothers. Joe Chase said the James boys wrote to their Indian wives numerous times, but the sister's mother, Mrs. Thomas Wabusha, would not allow her daughters to reply. She did not want them to have any more to do with the gun-toting Jameses. She also feared the government would take away their children because they were children of white men and kept them in hiding when a white man would come around. Maggie Wabusha later married William Goodteacher. The other sister went to Minnesota, leaving daughter Emma behind, and Maggie and her husband raised her. The older Indians in Devil's Nest verified Joe Chase's story, and also Paul James, no relative of the James brothers, who spent 3 years at Haskell Institute in Lawrence, Kansas, said he once met Frank James in Kansas City, where Frank asked him what sort of Indian he was. When he replied, a Santee Sioux, then Frank told him about him and his brother's stay in the Devil's Nest. He also asked about the boy and the girl of the Wabusha sisters, not admitting that they belonged to him and his brother. Frank James also stated that Janique had been shot by a member of the gang because he had stolen their money. Jesse James lived in St. Joseph, Missouri under the name of Thomas Howard. As far as anyone knew, was a respectable and more than ordinarily pious businessman. So that was an excerpt from Echoes of the Past Along Pioneer Trails by Esther Coulterman Hansen. And this was published, I believe, in the 1950s or 60s from accounts prior to that. But that is the account of the people in the area and the story of Jesse James's son, Joe Chase, and Frank's daughter, Emma. So before you say that the story is hogwash, you should remember it was written about well over half a century ago. And the people mentioned in the story do exist, and they can be tracked in newly digitized census and ancestry records. I found all kinds of records on Joe Jesse Chase and records for the Wabushas, and so there are records. And so Joe did exist. He's well documented. He had many children. One of his children that's listed in one of the census or ancestry records is named Jesse James Chase. So that seems to not be a coincidence either. And these records are from, long ago, from the early 1900s. So it's clear that Joe was not full Native American. There are some pictures of him. He does look very white. He has the receding hairline on, both sides of the forehead, just like Jesse had. And he resembles Jesse a lot. So there also appears to be other people, in the area that have verified these details too. And there also appears to be no Chases in this area before Jesse and Frank Chase appeared in the area. It wasn't a common name in the area. It doesn't appear in any of the records for any of the people around there before that. So it appears that some people with the last name of Chase showed up, and then there starts to be some people in the area with the last name Chase, but not prior to this situation. So it was also known that the James brothers really liked Nebraska a lot, and they had spent a lot of time in Nebraska City, and I believe there's even possibly a treasure buried in Nebraska City or near Nebraska City that Jesse and Frank buried there. Also, not only did they spend time with friends there, it was said that Jesse was in the process of buying some land in Nebraska, and I believe he was buying it under one of his aliases, Thomas Howard, and I believe this was a little bit more south of there, near Bloomington, Nebraska, but there's a lot of connections to the Jameses and Nebraska. And it seems that this would be a little bit easier to prove some of these claims and stuff with DNA because Joseph Chase, he has some of his descendants alive today, and Jesse James has descendants alive today also. So DNA testing could be done to determine if there's enough shared DNA to show that someone is a third or a fourth cousin or something along those lines, which would be approximately what you'd probably be looking at today. So this would be more simple to do than, say, Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid, they don't really know for sure where his grave is or where his mother's grave is because those have changed over time. So anyhow, this is the story of Jesse and Frank James's children that they had with Indian wives.